Everybody, thank you very much for being here. Welcome to the Embassy of Italy. Tonight we enter the 6th year of our digital diplomacy series, a total of 21 events and panel discussions, 80 panelists and speakers, the majority of whom women, total of 47. Tens of live streamed and broadcasted hours on Twitter, Facebook and YouTube. Thousands of participants in person, like all of you in our auditorium tonight. And many more are following us on social media using hashtag digital diplomacy. I'm particularly happy to start our 2018 season with an all-women panel covering a topic that is very current, engagement and social interactions. Our panel will guide us around the very meaning of engagement in the digital age, how government and the private sector look at it, and the role of partnerships, social activism, online versus offline activities. For diplomacy, engagement is key. As diplomats, we need to engage with audiences, with partners, our own citizens, and with the private sector. We do it online as well as offline, at the intersection of tradition and innovation. This is the very meaning of our digital diplomacy series, and why we love to have engaged audiences in person here at the Embassy, as well as online all over the United States. Our panel today brings a plethora of experiences in both government and the private sector, in technology as well in industry rooted in tradition. To all our panelists, grazie. Thank you all for being here with us today. A special thank you to Fran Holuba, our moderator tonight. Fran is the founder of Chief Social Architects. She previously worked at Politico, where she contributed to the creation of the company's division on social enterprise, and at the White House, serving as a strategic millennial voice for the Office of Global Engagement. Grazie, Fran. You have the floor.
Prego, but that's about it to the extent of my Italian. Thank you so much for having us, Deputy Chief of Mission. We are just experiencing together right here the first form of engagement, which we have to give thanks to our host embassy here at the Embassy of Italy, and particularly to Andreas, who has been curating these conversations in such a high level of dynamic speakers and presenters that the room was sold out before many of us could even post on social media to let our friends know. So, you know what? That's kudos to the embassy for being able to continually produce at a high level and engage a community of diplomats and thinkers and, you know, influencers in your own right. So thank you for taking the time to be out here with us tonight. As a moderator, my biggest role is to really showcase and highlight the fantastic panelists that we have here tonight. And we have some dynamic females with us. It feels great to say that. So first, I think I would like to introduce the panelists in the way that they interact in my life. And often I am seeing their professional and personal worlds and brands come up on different platforms and different work projects that I'm working on in so many ways, and that's so exciting. And to see how women from so many various cultures and backgrounds as well. I should note that we all speak a different language besides English on this panel. And that is something that I'm proud of, and I'm excited to hear about the ways that they use engagement and define it in their own world. First, let's hear about, in a way, could you please introduce yourself with a framework of finishing this sentence: changing hearts and minds. Katherine.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Katherine Vargas. Changing hearts and minds is beyond fact checks and one-pagers. It's really connecting with people at a human level and being able to empathize and really be able to walk in somebody else's shoe, and then taking that connection into action. In my own career, I had the pleasure of being able to work on changing hearts and minds, both in the nonprofit sector as well as with the government. My background, I'm also very proud bicultural person, as many of us are here. I was born in Colombia, and I had my story is similar to as many other immigrants who have come to this great country. I came at the age of 14 and proudly call myself that I have my feet in both worlds, that I can understand and feel very proud about my Colombian roots, but also have been able to assimilate and be thankful for the great opportunities that this country has provided me. And I took that passion for this, having had the immigrant experience of wanting to have a better life in the U.S., and working nonprofit organizations advocating for immigration reform and immigrant rights. As you can remember, about 12 years ago, there were large marches in fighting for immigration reform. So I work for nonprofit organizations who wanted to show that these people are no different than hundreds of years ago from the people who came to this country in search of a better dream. And how can we make sure that our immigration system reflects the needs that we need in the 21st century? So using social media, back in the day, there was still a little bit of Twitter and Twitter parties, but how can we really tell the stories, whether it's dreamers who, are Americans in every word but paper, and show those stories and show that being able to really connect with their stories. And I also work at the White House with Francis and Nicole for President Obama. I was the director of Hispanic media, and I had the great pleasure of being able to shape the president's message to the Latino community and how his agenda help further the community, whether it's on the economic front, education, access to healthcare through the Affordable Care Act, but really being able to connect with people and how they are personally impacted. And frankly, social media is a great way to connect with people. You don't need media to be able to reach. So I will say that in a nutshell, that's how I feel we're changing hearts and minds.
I love it. And my Sicilian 97-year-old grandmother can remember the times when Italians also faced persecution as immigrants to this country. So at my own dinner table, I am hearing the stories that she's trying to share with me to pass on to the next generation. So hopefully we can all share in that regard of those stories. Okay, let's keep going. Nicole, changing hearts and minds.
Sure. Thank you, Francis. For me, changing hearts and minds is really indicative of everything we do each and every day at LinkedIn, where we are working to connect individuals to opportunity. And we do that through providing ways in which they connect to each other through a greater network, but also through connecting to jobs more directly. So for me, my path has really been about how can I leverage my background as the only daughter of Jamaican and Costa Rican immigrants, who also parle français randomly, but committed to identifying ways in which we can legitimately change outcomes for individuals from disadvantaged backgrounds. So I grew up in the Bronx in a time where growing up in the Bronx was not fun and popular, and actually more challenging. And for me, the question was, how can you legitimately create access for those who don't have a voice at the table? How can you ensure that you are connecting them to something greater than themselves, including to people around them who can make a difference in their lives? I knew that law school and the law would be that path. And so I went to law school. I did several graduate degrees in international human rights, really seeking to identify ways in which the struggle for an individual in the Bronx is comparable to someone in the banlieue or in the favelas in Brazil. And I realized at a very early age that each of us, we have a responsibility, especially for those to whom much is given, much is required. And so for me, changing hearts and changing minds is really about how do we do that each and every day in our respective circles to change outcomes for people who may not be at this table, may not have access to the great technologies that we are proliferating each and every moment, and how can we really transform their roles into something greater than exists for all of us, because that really is the only way in which I think we'll continue to be greater as a society. So I am personally grateful to be here. Thank you for listening and look forward to sharing more.
I think the quote there that I would just take away as something so strong was, instead of saying the kind of comment of to whom much is given, much is expected, you rephrase that to say to whom much is given, much is required. And that's a new world thinking in my opinion. And I just wanted to point that out, that I thought that was a fascinating piece. Phim, in your corner in the Washington Post, you just took over the social media of Washington Post for the full day of last Tuesday, which I think is what an accomplishment and cool experience. But you come from many different corners and have been changing hearts and minds everywhere you go. So how do you feel about that question?
Thank you, Fran, and thank you everyone for being here. It's quite an honor. Also, I speak very quietly, so please raise your hand if you can't hear me. I'm going to try my best to just speak into this mic. But yeah, so changing hearts and minds. I think it's great, actually, the order that we are going in, because my story echoes and ripples off of what Katherine and Nicole both said, and Fran as well. So I am a Hmong American refugee immigrant. So a lot of my life has always been, like Nicole was saying earlier, it's almost like you're bridging two worlds, and Katherine as well. It's like one foot is in my parents' world. So we immigrated here when I was a baby. However, because they were very young parents, I was growing up in many ways at the same time, but they were growing up in another whole country, in another whole culture. So, I learned everything at the same time, a lot of dualities, whether it was refugee experience, immigrant experience, but also being an American. But that's also why it was so hard for me when I went to college to decide, do I go and do my artful side where I'm doing art and design, or do I do more of the mind, right, and do something related to behavior, psychology, or politics and policy, and I just couldn't ignore one side or the other. So changing hearts and minds comes together for me in full, and that's why when everyone graduated, so I studied at Syracuse University, and I studied at Newhouse for creative advertising, but then I studied at Maxwell for policy and political science, and that's because I decided I can't choose one world over the other, and that's why I came to DC, because it is that nexus. I think everyone here knows that. There was an article the other day that said that DC's tech community is, I think, the top community for like women right now in America, and I think that speaks volumes about like how this marriage between science and art, and again like the heart and the mind comes together. And so for me, it's about storytelling. It's about not ignoring one side of the story or one part of the self. It's about combining the both and being able to package that up and deliver that again to create impact and to tell those stories for other people. So that was a bit convoluted, but that is my story.
I think that we will hear more and more about all those different communities that Phim is swimming in and out of, particularly here in DC, because very often diplomatic community in its own self is connected by one particular piece. The design community is as well, and is operating in a very different sphere here in Washington. So it'll be interesting to kind of dive through those. Anastasia, who actually speaks Italian, so we're in the right space for her to be ordering any delicious cannolis. We would love to hear from you about what is changing hearts and minds in your opinion.
Yeah, so for me, really changing hearts and minds is just even thinking about digital diplomacy and what it means to bring people together. That there's plenty of issues that we all believe that we disagree on, but if we only took the time to get to know each other, we'd find that we all love food, we all love music, we all love to dance to that music, and we love to play sports, and we love to eat gelato. So there's always these different values, I think, that we need to find and build common ground on, which is where you change the hearts, and you touch people's hearts and then their minds follow. For me, at the moment with WeWork, I think we really embody that entrepreneurship, innovation, doing what you love is something that people that are working within our walls all find common ground on. They might not all be working on the same thing, but they're certainly passionate about what they do. And it's our mission to go beyond just being a workspace and building a community. So every single thing that we do intentionally brings people out of those walls and brings people together, whether it's a scheduled coffee moment or whether it's an event or whether it's music. It's all about bringing people out and having them meet, because when those people's ideas collide, that's when innovation really, really happens. My story and why I'm so passionate about this, I think really, I've always been passionate about global affairs, but after I had my kids, when I was ready to go back to work, I knew that if I was going to be dedicating a large amount of my time to do something, it had better be around creating impact. And so I then went to work with the UN Foundation, and I've been working with Andreas for a very long time, and thank you so much for having me here. Definitely my journey has been all about, working with a foundation that didn't have a huge budget to pay for advertising. And so, how do you leverage social media and the digital to kind of give everyone a voice in what they want with the world and the future of the world? And at the time it was with the Sustainable Development Goals. And now kind of moving into where I am, thinking about, And changing hearts and minds is really even more about bringing people out of, you know, their little digital realms around their computers, to meet. And so that's how I think changing hearts and minds happen.
I love it because all four of these women, as you can tell, are in so many other roles and different positions in their life besides the ones that you see up here. And I think that's a very common thing when you're talking to influencers. An influencer is someone this day and age that can get other people to do things just by recommending them, sometimes just doing them, sometimes just alluding to the idea that this is something that we're all kind of going towards. And it's a very fascinating new way to start looking at the world of engagement. And one of the things, the reason I bring up that word influencer is because many of you in this room are influencers, and the conversations that someone like the Embassy of Italy, an organization in a country that is dedicated to forming and convening people, are in many ways connected by different circles than you're usually used to engaging with. So I start by saying that because these are the definitions of engagement that you look up when you start preparing for a panel like this. And the place to usually go, and as in my case, is Google. Where do we go to ask everything? Google, what is credit? How do I get it? Can we borrow it? Can we share it? No. These are the things that have been teaching an entire generation of Americans and beyond, now a global community, about the world around them. And we forget sometimes that the world is communicating on a series of incredible platforms that have been offered to us through Google that we're not normally talking about in terms of engagement. So I start there by kind of saying, show us the landscape of the Google world and how you're intervening and influencing and inspiring our daily life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people don't realize sometimes how vast Google is in terms of available tools for connecting, because it's not just a search engine. So we also own YouTube. And if you're thinking about the power of video, of being able to create emotion and tell a story, and I do want to talk about YouTube as a great tool that you have for storytelling. And can you make impact and can you make social change thanks to storytelling? For example, we have a very diverse creator community where you can be a transgender student in some part of rural part of America, and you can create a sense of community and know that you're not all alone, and being able to connect with somebody across the world or across the country. And a great example of how some nonprofit organizations are able to use YouTube when they don't have large budgets, as you were mentioning, Anastasia, that you don't have those advertising dollars, but you can still be able to connect with your supporter base and inspire them to take action. One good example is the It Gets Better campaign, where Dan Savage decided to use the power of video to tell the story. There was a big rise of youth, LGBTQ youth who were committing suicide. And how can you tell these kids it gets better with time? And then it just organically grew in a way that I don't think they saw it coming, where you had celebrities, you had President Obama, and other people just sharing their own story that, yes, I also struggled when I was a teenager, but have some patience with yourself, it will get better. And that not only was a great way to change hearts and minds, but it also was able to become a grassroots campaign that supported some of these hotlines and other nonprofit organizations helping LGBTQ youth. So that's one example of using YouTube. Also, just the power of, as I was saying, walking in somebody else's shoe. We partnered with The Guardian for this virtual reality film for people to experience what it is to be like in solitary confinement. And I encourage you to see it. You can go to YouTube and search for 6x9. And how can we use this video of what you feel if you're in solitary confinement, but also get statistics. So, you can just give people all these statistics, but can you make them feel what it feels like? It's a great tool for people to use. So I can talk about many other products that we use, but I just wanted to show those two great examples of how nonprofit organizations and others can use the power of video to connect with people through human emotion.
So I love that as an empathy kind of building tool that we're kind of viewing YouTube in particular. One of the ones that I think everyone in the room can be surprised that you're working with the government on is a platform that I'm very familiar with called Waze. And in my experience, and maybe everyone in this room, Waze was the thing that we knew where the cops were. So how is it that you're working with the government on a platform that we thought was kind of figuring out how to get past the cops?
Yeah, it speaks to the power of technology and open data. So Waze launched, which is also owned by Google, launched this Connected Citizens initiative where we're able, as you know, Waze is a way that you're crowdsourcing information about where there's a traffic cop, where there's also potholes. So if in your way to work, you always see the same pothole and it's very annoying, and then you multiply with multiple people who are seeing this pothole, and you can share that data with local governments, then that you can help improve government efficiency, but also call attention to places that need attention. So it's just a way that the private and the public sector can partner with. And actually, that reminded me too of, in terms of crowdsourcing, not just with governments, but also it's been interesting to see nonprofit organizations and activists taking the technology of crowdsourcing for their own advantage as well. So we have seen in countries like India, Egypt, and Syria, where women who were being sexually abused, were able to collect the information through crowdsourcing and using Google Maps API to be able to highlight which are the hot spots where you see those instances of sexual abuse and sexual harassment, in a way that A, empowers women to know to avoid those hotspots, but B, they work with also the local governments and the local community to take some action and have some consequences for where there's this incidence of gender-based violence. And there's organizations like Holuba, where activists have using this Google Maps API to be able to empower women. So not only in the United States, but also in other countries as well.
So I love this because we're also sitting here with two incredible women who helped kind of introduce the former administration into this idea that public policy and big data are good friends. And that should be considered when going into new future public policy missions, because there's a lot of amazing coalitions and businesses that are willing and now equipped, thanks to many of you all who were kind of asking on behalf of the government from the private sector, and really now playing a big role in shaping that. So Nicole, I'd love to kind of talk to you about and kind of get your share here on how LinkedIn and governments play together, work together, tackle projects together, and where that kind of took from your incredible role in the Obama administration as a special assistant to the president.
Sure. So I worked with Kathy in the White House for over 5 years, and most recently worked with President Obama as a special assistant for legislative affairs, really serving as a liaison between Congress and the White House. After leaving the White House, I transitioned to LinkedIn, which really had been a long-term partner for the administration on leveraging all of its data on the platform to help cities with workforce development challenges. How are we doing it, you ask? Because many of you who are on LinkedIn, you're thinking of yourself as, okay, I have a profile, I don't really check it often, I may have updated it, but what we're doing is we're using all of the insights that we have, as Kathy mentioned, these APIs and these analytics to really provide information into what's happening at the local level. So when you think about LinkedIn, think about it in this way. In addition to all your profiles, we have 550 million globally on the platform. We have 20 million companies that are using LinkedIn to hire and retain and recruit talent. We have 30,000 institutions of higher education. So I can see where essentially Kathy or Francis or anyone in this room may have not only gone to school, but what you learned in your institution of higher education, what graduate degree you may have, how long you worked at Google or at Politico, and then where did you go from there? And thinking about all of those profiles in the aggregate, you're able to see that 68% of the workforce in Detroit may be on LinkedIn. And you can see what are the skill sets that that population may have, more so than a population in Austin, which could skew a little bit more manufacturing as opposed to social media marketing that you would find in San Francisco. So all of that information has been critical because when you think about over 6 million open jobs in the US alone, the question is, how do you leverage private sector data to assist with some of the public sector information and fill in those gaps? So what we've done to really operationalize this is partner with cities like Toronto or New York or Los Angeles. We've essentially helped build the tech talent pipelines for over 50 cities in the US, which started with President Obama and the Tech Hire program. We've also brought it to Europe and to APAC. We most recently launched a partnership in South Africa with the World Bank. And this is the power of data, right? We were sitting in Durban and literally sharing this information with city officials and talking about who were some of the top employers. And they kept saying, wait a minute, who is this employer? And it turns out that was one of the largest employers in the past year. They had hired the most people in the city of Durban, but those officials hadn't known. Why? Because it was an international logistics manufacturing company, and they just weren't aware of all of the recent hires and by what skill set. So when you think about the power of data, specifically for countries or cities or governments that may not have comparable data sets, we've been really grateful to sit at the forefront of much of it and to leverage all of our insights to ensure that we're providing critical information and recommendations so that you know that training your students in social media marketing, they'll be better positioned for that job at Google or at LinkedIn or at Politico. And so we look forward to more of that to come. But that really is just the crux of some of the public and private sector partnerships.
Those of you in countries that would be interested to do this kind of collaboration, it's super exciting to me to think about what that means globally to answer some of these incredible global public policy challenges that we have, all of us here together. So I welcome you, and I kind of think and challenge people in the room to be considering where you're coming from in the world and how you can think about how big data and actually the answers and solutions that we have right here could make change on your local level. As we think about community and jobs and job creation, the two experts over here, I have first with Anastasia, I'm going to go to you, jobs. So WeWork, as you were kind of describing, and I'd love you to kind of give everyone a little deeper introduction to what this concept is. Many times I have friends around the city that visit a WeWork in hopes of understanding the millennial coworker that they have just down the cubicle from them. And it's my great excitement to kind of see what you all are doing in a new firm, or rather traditional form of engagement, actually human interaction. So can you talk a little bit about how you're getting people out of their offices and into the community space? And that's a beer tap if you didn't get that hand gesture. So please, Anastasia.
Yeah, so WeWork at this point, we're a global company. We have 200,000 members, and we're pretty much on track to double that by the end of the year, which is really, really exciting. But having all of these people all over the world, again, what does that mean if they're staying in their offices? It means absolutely nothing. So every single thing that we do from our app that we have, it's kind of like a Facebook for WeWork members. So there's different groups, whether you like running or whether you're a women entrepreneur. It makes it really easy to connect. We do a lot of events and curation during the day. So whether it's different coffee breaks, whether it's opening the beer tap at a certain time, everything is done very, very intentionally to get people out of their offices. But what I'm really excited about is actually one of the programs that I work on, which is called the Creator Awards. And it's really thinking about how do we take this kind of a step beyond each building or each city and really kind of build a global community around innovation and entrepreneurship and people who are very much creating their life's work. And so with the Creator Awards, it's an initiative that we launched last year with the whole idea behind, as we continue to grow, we want to make sure that the whole ecosystem of creators and entrepreneurs and innovators and nonprofit champion and leaders are all continuing to grow with us. And so we made a commitment, and last year we gave out over $20 million through a series of global events. And we saw all sorts of different kinds of impactful, artistic, tech companies. It's really a program that rewards everyone. And what we've really seen happen with this is that we're starting to build this global community of people who won these awards, who are finalists. We bring them to boot camps. We train them on how to pitch better, how to build a business plan, how to grow your business properly. And they're all connecting with each other, and they're building this unbelievable network and community within themselves. And it's inspiring others around them. And so it's just really, really interesting, and kind of back to the whole idea of, yeah, these people can connect via the app, and that's great. And they can join the women entrepreneurship group and maybe go to an event once in a while. But when you're intentionally building communities around something where you see true innovation coming out of, I think it's just an unbelievable thing. And I'll just kind of finish by saying, like, our community, I feel like everyone thinks like, WeWork is like the millennial generation. And like, to be honest, if you come to the WeWork White House where I work, it's like suits and like some older people. But really, enterprise and big clients, and I think all of you, or maybe not you, but, Google has space with us, and LinkedIn has space with us, Facebook has space with us, IBM, Expedia. I mean, all of the big conglomerates from all around the world are taking a look at what we do, and they're saying, hey, I focus on travel. That's what I do as a business. I don't get real estate build out and employee, happiness and all of this stuff. So they're now coming to WeWork because we can provide that. And we say, hey, we're the experts in making your employees happy. You may not be able to afford like the Google campus, but everyone can get like a 4-person office at a WeWork and be able to collaborate and collide with so many other people. I'll end with one little stat, which I absolutely love, which is that 70% of our global community has said that they've collaborated to some extent. And 50% have said that they've done transactional business, whether that means, you've hired the graphic designer because you've seen their logo across from the hallway of where you work, whether it means that you're co-bidding on a contract, whether it means that you've been doing work together for so long that your companies have actually merged. We know that innovation happens when there's more people that are together who are kind of working towards a common goal.
I love that. And seeing what you're doing at the Creator Awards and kind of the approach that the company's even taking to just philanthropy, I think that it's fascinating. Other companies just give money. This company throws a full-on job fair with free headshots for anyone who can come in the neighborhood, and free RSVP. It's incredible to think about fixing a solution or fixing a problem with a real solution instead of just an awareness event, which we're all very used to. And sometimes we claim that we're trying to go deeper, and then we get stuck in the kind of shallow waters of awareness building. Someone who's able to kind of pierce through that peripheral kind of shallow area is you, Phim. And in every corner that we've seen you in your professional kind of powerhouse here, I think relates back to what you do in your spare time. And so I'd love you to challenge you to start there and talk about who you are when you're not Phim at the Washington Post, because that person, I think, is one of the strongest personalities and brands we see in the community.
Thank you so much for saying that. I'll say one last thing related to the Post, though. On the record, our Chicago office works out of a WeWork, so how funny. But yes. But to talk more about my work outside of work, so to say, which sounds kind of funny. So before I joined the Washington Post, I was a senior designer at Politico. And so I'm heavily involved and invested in the design and tech community here in DC, as well as America, and then, of course, beyond that as well. And so what does that mean? How does that look like? So I'm a part of AIGA, which is the largest professional association organization for designers. And I do a lot of what comes off like community service, volunteer work, but it really is about activism, diplomacy in so many ways. And going back to the idea of like hearts and minds, it's being able to basically harness the power of great minds who are designers, who think and are paid to strategize and come up with visual solutions and storytelling on the job, and inspiring them to inspire one another to volunteer and do more community activism, and basically to use the skills that they do from 9 to 5, from 5 to 9, so to say. And so how does that work, or what am I doing on the ground? I'm involved in multiple programs. One of them is the National Emerge program. So that is targeted towards helping lift up younger designers who have just started or switched career tracks. Let's say you may be 50-something and you've decided, I'm interested in UX. Tech is the future. How do I get involved? So giving them the right resources and programming to help them on their way, or a young designer of color who, like me, probably never had, access to a Mac. Even like I didn't buy my first Mac until I think I was like 2 years out of college, to give you an idea. And that comes from, being a refugee immigrant from the inner city of Syracuse. And, there's so many stories that these storytellers don't get to tell, or that they live through, but they don't know how to kind of continue on to that next chapter, right? So we, as AIGA, say, as an organization, we have your back. Let's figure out the right programming, et cetera. And so right now I'm in the process of, developing this program that won't happen until October. But right now we are doing all the back end work, as I'm sure all of you here totally know from the panels to everyone sitting here. Yesterday I literally did what is equivalent to a Gantt chart / project management, like scheduling of, how can we make sure that we can reach as many designers, young designers as possible, to tell them this program exists, get involved with your local chapter, learn we are here to help you train yourself on the job, for the job, etc. Because it is so important to also lift the voices and also tell a young designer who may be from the LGBTQ community, or a designer of color who may say, wait, when I look in this design space, this tech space, I don't see anyone who looks like me. What we're trying to do is we're trying to say, no, you come with us, be a part of this, because your story and your understanding of empathy, like Kathy was saying, is going to make the difference in the boardroom. What you have to say today, and the presence that you have, is what's going to ultimately lift all tides for every community, your community back home to the community that you may be serving, for X business project. And so that's why it's so important for us to invest early on, through storytelling, through Instagram, Facebook messages, behind the scenes of what we're doing, in hopes that whether it's a small program or a long-term one, that that everyone's voice is heard, reflected, and that, again, it's capturing hearts and minds and telling people that what you do has socioeconomic, cultural ramifications in a good way. Or so I should not say ramifications. I should say it's a revolution, right? But yeah, so that is what I do on the side, but using all the best practices from private, right? Like the private sector, into almost pushing towards more of that public sector in one form or another. But yeah.
So it's incredible to me to have a juxtaposition of just the two sides here, that, even in your day job, Phim, at Washington Post, your nighttime job, in a weird way, of, supporting and nurturing and cultivating a community of diverse designers and women in tech here in DC, is leading to these other larger effects that they're seeing on the big data side. And this is where the really exciting parts kind of come together, where we can start actually tracking progress and movement within certain sectors for different groups. And so this is where, I think here I'm going to kind of open it up to you all to start kind of jumping in with conversations to each other. And then we're going to take some conversation or question starters from you all to kind of keep this going. I will, as we start kind of lining up, I do have two fantastic friends here from the Embassy of Italy, Liliana and Sarah, who do have microphones. So if you want to start raising your hands and kind of signaling to the to the helpers that you have some questions, we'll start queuing those up. But in the meantime, I'm going to actually push it towards Anastasia to start talking a little bit about some of the continuing professional studies and kind of places where mentorship and where do you learn to be a designer or a programmer. Some of those services and areas of support are coming from some of these major corporations and tech partners here in the city. So I want to give them a chance to kind of talk about some of the initiatives of coding camps or boot camps or things like that you guys have coming up for WeWork.
So we've had a lot of really exciting announcements lately, but what I'm really, really excited about is that last year we acquired the Flatiron School, which is the largest digital coding academy. They really consider themselves to be sort of like the Harvard of coding schools. They're actually about to open. I think they're closing applications. So if you decide that you're wanting to pivot your career, now's a good time. But so we're going to open at the WeWork White House, and we're going to start having classes there. And what's really interesting to me about this also kind of brings in most of the work that I do and that Fran actually works with me on, which is, last year or 2 years ago, rather, after the election, I was doing a lot of stuff with the Hillary campaign, and then she lost. And Fran came to me and she said, we're not criers, we're doers. You don't have a job. Everyone we know is either about to lose their job or maybe have just lost it. Let's have a job fair and let's have that target audience be on transitioning professionals. And let's connect all of those people to really impactful opportunities because sure, everyone wants to go work with LinkedIn and Google and the Washington Post and WeWork. But really, there's such a host of amazing other companies and impactful organizations out there. And so really, it's our mission to do that. And so that's actually kind of the marquee project that we're working on right now within the Creator Awards is having this social impact job fair. So that way, everywhere we go, we can be highlighting really great, impactful companies and being a conduit for them to connect with great talent. And kind of to the contrary, we want great talent to understand that a great opportunity doesn't necessarily mean working with a Fortune 500 brand. You can make a huge impact with a small company, and it's our mission to sort of be that platform and conduit to make those connections happen.
My favorite job fair participant was actually the Peace Corps. And you never think about like, oh man, that would be a great job. I think all diplomats also have that secret side of them that loves that. As we answer some questions, I want, if you can, to also include some platform conversations about Google and LinkedIn and Washington Post about ways that you're educating and engaging, because I think education is the next phase that I would love to kind of dive into with all of you, but I want to be respectful of the folks that do have questions in the room. So please, gentlemen, if you can introduce yourself and where you're representing, that would be great as well. Thank you.
Very glad to hear you want to hear about education. My name is Mike Nelson. I work for Cloudflare, which is an internet security firm based in San Francisco, but I work in the DC office. We work White House, and I'm one of the old guys in suits. For the last 10 years, I've also been teaching at Georgetown, teaching internet studies. So I have a very 20th century question for you. Can each of you mention a single book that has helped you understand technology and or community, something you'd recommend to the audience for further homework?
Great. Yeah, Phim.
Instead of one book, I would like to mention an influencer to echo Fran's earlier comment. His name is John Maeda. It is spelled John, and then Maeda is Maeda. He is a very well-known designer and thought leader inside the tech and design community, but he is that perfect merge between someone who cares deeply about the technical angles of his profession, but cares deeply about leadership as well. So I would really recommend him. He has a lot of books that he's written, but if you just follow his Twitter feed, you can see all that he cares about, from doing, basically the equivalent to this huge annual report, just out of he does it wherever he goes, every job whichever company he goes, he does this, but you can tell it's because it's from his heart. He cares so deeply to basically do this huge tech census every year about what is going on in the design community and the tech community. How can we keep up, but how can we do better for our community as well? So it's not just about your profession, but he's just wonderful. So I definitely recommend checking him out.
Okay, I think I will be remiss to not say how Google works. It's just, it's required reading as you are interviewing for Google. So sorry to be lame, but you had to. I mean, it just kind of help explain also the vision of the founders and of Eric. I will also just make a plug for a publication that I feel a lot of people in DC don't follow, which is Fast Company. Mm-hmm. And it does give you a lot of insight about what tech companies are doing. And it just takes you completely outside of DC. But it also shows you the social innovation, how nonprofit organizations, how governments are using tech, and how they're using civic tech. So yes, they do cover the latest product, but there's also a lot to learn. And it's just good for our news media diet to get out of the usual political publications of DC.
I would also echo exactly what Kati mentioned in terms of Fast Company and Wired as another outlet. And then I do think I would be remiss if I didn't mention our own co-founder, Reid Hoffman, who's an excellent innovator in this space and has talked about ways to scale companies. What are the unique attributes of scaling, and how do you know when is the moment to take your company to that next level, which I think is often sometimes lost in this space. But I would also challenge the audience to think about others who are beyond tech and the contributions that they make generally. When you think about innovation, how some of the best ideas really come from the intersection of innovation, creativity, design, and tech. I've been inspired by some of the dancers and some of the media artists that we're seeing. What are the unique ideas that they're coming up with, and how is that legitimately contributing to the environment that we see right now each and every day?
My Bookworm over there.
I know this is a tough one for me because I'm a biography junkie. But I would be remiss if I didn't plug Andreas's book. Conversations in Digital Diplomacy. I love it. It's just a series of essays and interviews with experts and their perspectives on the topic at hand. And I think it's a quick read. It's a great read. So if you've been coming to these and you haven't read it yet, you should definitely grab a copy.
And I'm going to jump in to kind of give a plug for a group that helped curate the way I think of the world, Ashoka. Bill Drayton, the founder of Ashoka, who really coined the term social entrepreneur. It's over there in Roslyn on the other side of, that big river that no one crosses to get over there. No, where he wrote a book, co-wrote a book called Forces for Good that was talking about the best practices of fantastic nonprofits and how they created communities and coalitions and built modern day public policy solutions using all sorts of actors, including government and the private sector and nonprofits, which really opened my mind to how new governments can be working and be formed. If we want to take some more questions over here. Just 1 second.
Hi, I'm Grace. I'm really lucky to be here, and I'm a huge. Your books are my Bible, so I just feel like
Great.
I work one foot at the State Department, the other foot in a social innovation place, and I feel like sometimes it's such an odd one out, wanting to be more creative, wanting to be more innovative, and wanting to help others learn how to be more innovative. And as professionals in these fields, how do you overcome some of those organizational stumbles, and how can you innovate in that conservative environment, and how do you help others become more so? Thank you.
Ooh, we have a lot of bureaucracy ninjas up here, so this one's going to be a good one. Anastasia, why don't you take this first? The United Nations Foundation can feel a lot like that State Department sometimes.
I think you need to be a quiet disruptor. So I think that, if you have a great idea, and coming from kind of a lot of my past where, sometimes I do beat to my own drum, but I think what I've learned is that if you have a good idea, it's not enough to have a good idea. You need to also have a well thought out strategy to go along with that. And so for me personally, there had been times where I went into my boss's office and I was like, oh my God, we have to do this. It's such a great partnership. It's such a great idea. And he's like, just come back with like a real pitch, And so it really, I think that you need to think about, what are those areas that you want to create impact within state, and, really think about who would be the stakeholders, who would you engage, what would the strategy be, how would you tactically implement that, and then go and pitch your idea. And you might be surprised that you'll get people behind you who also want to see that vision come to life.
I'll go down the line, but I'm already so excited to hear what everyone else has to say. Fran, I hope you also chime in with this one as well. Yes, so I will say I'm this weird paradox because, as I said when I introduced myself, I'm pretty soft-spoken. Like, I know the sound of my voice is very quiet. But my former boss, John, used to always say, Phim, you have this habit where if the door doesn't open, you kind of like kick through the wall, and then suddenly we're inside and we're sitting in this table where we weren't necessarily invited, like to be a part of. And that doesn't mean, like that the people at the table were like, you're terrible, don't come in. No, it was more that they didn't know we existed, right? Which I think sometimes happens, right? Like there's this innovative idea over here. Let's just somehow find a way to connect it over here. And so, I promise I did not break any walls. But what I would do is I would do exactly what Anastasia's talking about, little micro acts, one at a time. Like I think a lot of times it goes back to curiosity and figuring out what your stakeholder is curious about and questioning them. And then naturally they're going to be like, wait, what about this other thing? And then you're like, oh yeah, tell me more. And then you're finding, that perfect match between what they're looking for and what you can get towards, and kind of breadcrumbing along the way. But I think listening, empathy goes a long way, and also demonstrating at times. So I will give a plug for my Wash Post Life takeover that happened last week. You can see what I did there. I did a design thinking workshop for colleagues, the majority of them who have never done design thinking before, which is a simple way of saying it's human-centered design. And so you're thinking about the human, the end user, and then you're just thinking about, let's do an empathy map. What does this person care about? How can we innovate around that? So that instead of being like, we have the solution, it's more like, what do they need so that we can actually solutionize towards that, so to say. And so I do these workshops as a way to actually inspire innovation internally, because a lot of times people won't naturally, or some people just do not care to like reach out and say, hey, I want to collaborate. So I try to do trainings or offer my trainings as a way to internally rise up more conversations and a culture of innovation from start to finish.
I love this. I would just shortly say to someone who's battling it out at State Department, I share the administration woes from the previous administration that had a full staff of the State Department and the administration. So I don't envy you there in trying to understand how that's working. I would say what Phim is talking about is a perfect example of how you come into a conversation knowing the people who are going to be on the opposite side of your solution, getting those people and empathizing with those people to your position before you get there is a great solution, because everyone likes a bipartisan solution. Whether or not that's the best solution in the room, it's the one that gets the most attention because you've already done the necessary work of making sure that's something they can live with. And in DC, I think often 2 times we rush to get something out before we actually communicate it with all the necessary stakeholders to make sure it's the best idea in the room. Team of Rivals, again, we'd probably add that into the list of books to add to your class. My policy ninjas, bureaucracy ninjas over here. How do you do it?
I would add allies are critical. So finding the right allies in the room, but also the timing. Not everything that you want to happen is going to happen in the time frame that you want it to happen. So it's critical that you are patient, that you identify the right stakeholders who can help to achieve those objectives with you, that you can identify the right allies who can really be surrogates for you and advocates when you don't have them at the table. And then just I promise, patience. Like any great thing will take time to accomplish, and you really do have to cultivate the perfect network to accomplish it. And that really, I think, will help drive the day.
So Nicole took my answer. I just want to say that. So what I wanted to say is, like, we live in Washington, D.C. Everything is a game of chess. Like I wish I could be aspirational and be all you can be. And if you fight hard, you will make it. No. House of Cards reflects a lot of the dynamics, particularly when you work in government and on the Hill and so on. So being able to identify who are going to be your champions and who is going to be fighting for that idea when you're not in the room. And also have some humility that even though you may have the best idea ever, if you propose it, sometimes might not actually get it across the finish line. And it doesn't mean that you're not going to take credit for it, but at least you know who are the right people who are going to be able to make entryways, particularly at the high levels of power, which is not the best advice that you can give, but I just want to be pragmatic of unfortunately the place where we are.
No, I think it's a really important question, and it speaks volumes about women in governance, because the question and debate there for you was, is the idea good enough that it should get done no matter what? So even if it's not my voice, I'm willing to put it forward so that it does get done, or do I need to be the one who says it? And I think that you fight that necessary battle of trying to understand what is at stake, and if you're serving your country, it would seem that you come second in the sense of serving your country first. And that's a really interesting and very good point to clarify about the way a woman makes decisions, and particularly someone who's been in governance. And I've seen again and again you putting forth incredible ideas that make their way to the top, and not at your lips. And so I just want to say that that's something I admire and that I see as you are influencing and engaging. So we do have a question coming in from Twitter, from Len. I believe you're also in the room. But speed and accuracy are sometimes opposing forces when it comes to covering news and in practicing #digital diplomacy. Both are important. How would the panel recommend resolving the two? Kathy, going back to you.
Yeah, I'll speak first, obviously, because of Google's role in terms of informing. We take accuracy, and we're in the business of trust. So being able to have sources that are accurate but also timely, it's an important balance that we have. Obviously, the issue of fake news is something that is dominating the headlines. So I think it is important that we also, kind of highlight some of the efforts that we've done. We're improving our search results to make sure that authoritative sources are at the top, so people are able to identify those who are in fact media outlets as opposed to what we call fake news. We also have other programs that make sure that there are fact checks as people are searching. But this is something that we take very seriously, and I think as we know, there's a lot of content that is being uploaded minute by minute, so it's not something that it's we understand the challenge, and I think there's a lot of room for improvement, but we take this very seriously.
Phim, can I ask you to jump in on this as well?
Yes, I feel like I'm in the hot seat. But I will also say I am on the marketing side as opposed to the newsroom side. So any comment I make is not going to probably be from whatever you may have assumed if you just heard, oh, she works at the Washington Post. We also value, transparency. Obviously, we are very much against fake news. Democracy dies in darkness. So, we are here for, investigative journalism. There's so many stories that our wonderful newsroom has focused on, doing a lot of enterprise pieces to, double down on making sure that we investigate the truth and we go all the way. And I'm sure you saw the story about, the fact checking that we did earlier this year to ensure that we did not get a fake source. Right. And so that's to the level of, how much we not just value like legitimate news, but value the information that our readers are getting, right? Because it is so important. Everyone in this room, whether you read the Washington Post or Politico, whatever news source you are going to, you need that for your job. You need that to be accurate in the room, and we know that. So, whether it's for a child who just wants to understand what's happening in the world, or someone who's like, I'm a CEO, I need to know this, or I'm a lawmaker and I'm, responsible to my constituents, we make sure that our news, is as accurate as can be. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, I think engagement is information, and in so many ways, all of these groups and kind of technology, even at WeWork, they're receiving information about the surrounding world in TV monitors and screens, and so I think that engagement comes in all these directions. I want to be cognizant of the fact that it is already 7, so I want to make sure that we get 2 more questions I'm getting from the big boss. So if we can start over here, one and one over here for second question, anyone? Sorry, right here, second question, perfect.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for being here tonight. My name is Edward, and I'm currently working for the DC government's Department of Public Safety. So from my perspective, actually, I'm more curious about, so my professor used to say, like, to counter your enemies, that, to prove yourself is better. So, like, since everyone here, I believe, like, we all care about, like, the lone wolf activities, that, the domestic terrorism. So, and definitely I have this question particularly for Nicole, Catherine, and Phim, that, how we can use the social media, that to use actually digital diplomacy to mitigate the extremism thoughts, to reduce this kind of a risk, like, in future. Thank you.
Great. Anastasia.
I'd love to bring in one personal example of this, which I thought that we did really, really well at the UN Foundation, which was as we were building up towards adapting the new Sustainable Development Goals in a time where it was just all negative news and, stuff that obviously sells. We tried to get ahead of it by working on positive stories, and we partnered with the Thomson Reuters Foundation and picked, I think it was like 45 countries, where we literally went out and briefed panels of experts and local kind of embassy staff and UN staff and local influencers on the importance of the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals and why the specific countries or continents they were in needed to get behind them. And it really resulted in a huge stream of global news around the Sustainable Development Goals that never would have happened because the UN didn't have money to pay public relations firms all over the world to place stories. And so I think to kind of answer your question about getting ahead of it and using social strategy or this or that, I think sometimes we need to just stop the focus and stop retweeting all of the time these negative stories and think about what are some of these global institutions and organizations and companies that are doing great things and how do we creatively make sure that those stories are being heard.
I love this. Before this panel, we had a little bit of back and forth about positivity or pessimism. What works in terms of creating more impact? And that's a great kind of way that I think we can kind of shake this up. So Phim, you want to take that one next?
Yes, I will be brief just because I think I had a really long answer the last time around. But yeah, so I think authenticity is so important because people can always smell, fake versus real, especially online. Yes, there are real security risks involved. I am not trying to ignore that part of the question, but just at a high level and very briefly, I think, it comes back to powerful storytelling. Like it's the power of one voice makes all the difference. One quote, one caption, one picture at a time. I remember when I was just a freshman in college, that was when, the idea of a civic journalist and reporters started coming out. And that was when CNN started basically saying like, hey, anyone who wants to report, we have a platform, and they started experimenting. And I just remember sitting in class thinking like, wow, this is amazing. Like I used to have to feel like I'd have to be part of a student paper to be involved in this. And so I think, it starts with just one person at a time. And, the idea of being an influencer and bridging worlds and building a following, it starts with just continuously populating the world with good media or the media that you're looking to, kind of share more of, and building that natural following. And hopefully that can combat some of the extremism, or it can at least equalize, but not just equalize. It can also show that there are many shades, so one person to one view, one perspective.
Nicole?
Yeah, I would echo that. I think each of our respective platforms have taken necessary steps in the last year and several years to ensure that we are sufficiently addressing quote unquote fake news, whatever that looks like, and taking the steps to, while you're protecting member privacy and the right to freedom of speech, that you're sufficiently balancing that with the important level of accountability that you see that's needed on the journalism side. But I would echo my colleagues here. I really think it's incumbent on each and every person in this room and beyond, each and every user, to ensure that we are using platforms in a manner that is responsible and demanding accountability and really starting from the top. And I love what Anastasia said. You stop retweeting, stop sharing, right? What we do at LinkedIn, we ensure that it's flagged. We ensure that when we go beyond, and to the extent that there is something that needs to be addressed and taken down, we take the necessary steps to do so.
Then, I will echo in terms of power of storytelling. So at YouTube, there's a program called Creators for Change, and I encourage you to look it up. But it's a way where we are working with YouTube creators, usually are second-generation immigrants, and others who are taking the power of video to tell their own stories, to fight xenophobia, to fight extremism. I had the pleasure of working with one of them. His name is Nadir. He's British. Of Muslim descent, and he specifically was very frustrated about the image that media was portraying about young Muslims. And he said, like, this is not who we are, and I want to be able to use YouTube to show another side and be able to show about the great things that young Muslims are doing, so they can see that they're not alone. Can we create a sense of community? And I mentioned this because as you're thinking about the profile, or who is that youth who's at risk of being radicalized, is that person who doesn't feel that they belong. And what a great way to use the power of video to show a more positive view of what young Muslims are.
I love it. Last question.
Hi, so my name is Alex Rybov. I work for the Digital Impact Alliance hosted at UNF. So I'm excited that you mentioned UNF. So my question is, Digital Impact Alliance is a fairly new campaign, and thank you once again for sharing your stories. My question is, there's so many campaigns and so many missions that are just starting out, and they have these really passionate projects and messages that they want to deliver for the developing world. So my question is, for those campaigns that are starting new, how do you get influencers to pay attention to you? How do you get other organizations that might be able to leverage your mission and promote that when, for example, budget is a problem, or if you don't have that much influence or resources? So how would a campaign that's starting out be able to promote its mission, especially it's something that's very important and relevant? Thanks.
Do you want to start, or do you want to go back around this way? Yeah. Kati, you're on.
Okay, sure. So I think the 3 C's that make the causes important is content, community, and call to action. If you don't have content that is relevant for people, and if you're not being genuine, then your content, like your videos, are going to fall flat. So I'm again just using YouTube. NGOs may not have large budgets, but they do have a wealth of expertise and knowledge. So they have to be able to produce content that they believe in. And then community, like who are you talking to? Know your audience. And again, it's not about going viral, but it's about connecting with the right people. And then you have to have a very specific call to action, right? Like, yes, I mean, we remember Coney in 2012, like that was really video that became viral, but then we realized that the cause was like non-existent. Mm-hmm. So, you know, you have to be very basic. I mentioned it gets better, but there was a specific call to action about, you know, helping people understand that they will be okay later on. And then eventually the call to action was to support hotlines that help suicide prevention for LGBTQ community. So I think just focusing on those 3 C's is important.
I would add collaboration in the spirit of C's, identifying the right community and the right individuals who are willing to collaborate. I think we are currently in a time and place where we can continuously talk about the lack of resources that organizations and entities typically have, but you can also identify the ways in which, irrespective of those lack of resources, you're sufficiently positioned to access information, collaborators, stakeholders, and partners who can advance your goals. And I think about LinkedIn for this. We have groups on LinkedIn, millions of groups that you can legitimately access at the touch of a button, where you can identify who are like-minded individuals who can help to accomplish your goals and share in your respective objectives. And so there's almost no excuse anymore. I do agree that resources are tight for so many organizations and institutions, but I've seen examples where you can identify the right person, you can identify the right partner on the other side who's positioned to help you. And it's just about finding them and going after them and making the case, finding that call to action and finding that thing in common.
And I'd like to say, I almost want to turn the mic over to Fran, and I think I will for one moment if you guys can humor me, because I think Fran and I think we bonded over this a lot when we first met at Politico, because we do a lot of, you know, on the grounds community networking, and, you know, whether it's identifying and almost like helping someone else find their way as an innovator, or not innovator, like as an influencer, or just building up your community one person at a time, and investing in that and investing in a genuine network. I know DC is, we know this as a town where there's a lot of just talk for talk's sake, but like we are doers and builders, I think everyone here and everyone in this audience. So, you know, you understand the importance and the value of building a true, genuine network, so that when you finally are like, okay, this is the thing I need to activate you on, you have that power network to go after. And it starts with conversations and like person-to-person meetings. But if you wouldn't mind humoring me, sorry.
It's funny that Phim says that a great social network should be something that she says, and I am about to say it should be a great logo and a great design experience, because I've seen the power of trying to over communicate those things and bring the power of friends and the right people together. And then at the same time, I'm watching emojis start speaking multiple languages beyond anything that I could even say. And I think to myself, you know what? This society is really ready to go back to simpler times of cuneiform, where we're all kind of speaking in a form of smiley faces, because that's actually working faster than translating. As much as we want to think that the technologies at the speed with us. So much can be done with just one image of, something we all know is excrement, with smiley face. And all of a sudden, the poop emoji sometimes is universally, oh, what a day, and Monday. So I can just say that. On the other hand, I'd say it's design and the logo and your first impression, and many times that's visual for so much of the population. But Anastasia?
Yeah, so I have to say that the power of being a foundation or an organization is that people expect like private sector to pay for things. I think if you have a compelling message and cause and story, like everyone else here has said, and you identify the people that resonates with the most, that those people, everyone, I feel like in our day and age, kind of, we all want to get behind something positive that we support. And, when I was at the UN Foundation, we launched Giving Tuesday with no budget, and we pulled together, I think also creativity, right? How do you invent something new in order to get, free, I guess, help from influencers through a creative approach? And so with Giving Tuesday, it was creating social media ambassadors and giving people a clever title for otherwise just meant, we were going to find a lot of people with a lot of followers and give them regular messaging and have regular calls and make them feel really special and that they're part of something. With the Shot at Life campaign from the UN Foundation, it was all about, who's vaccinating their children. It's mothers. At the time, mom blogging was the biggest thing in the world. So how do we build this community of mom bloggers who can give back through using their voice, through advocacy, or through fundraising? And so having those three very easy call to actions in which you bring people. So I feel like no matter what cause or campaign, there's going to be that community of people who it will resonate with. And you just need to find creative ways of engagement. And right now, I really think it is YouTube. I know my kids, they don't watch TV, they only watch YouTube. And these YouTube stars have so much power behind them. So how do we creatively use them? LinkedIn influencers. These people, they sneeze and all of a sudden, they have billions of kind of views. I don't even know where that comes. Who knows what makes a sneeze resonate or not? No one can crack that code. But anyway, via LinkedIn, via all of these platforms. And so I think it's really scrubbing every single one of these platforms, identifying who is that target that you're trying to influence, and then maybe pick 10 or 15 that you really, really, really want to go to or go through and just figure out a way to get to them. And it's email, it's tweeting them directly, it's commenting on their Instagram or whatever it is. But eventually persistence, if you have a great message and a great cause, they're going to totally rally behind you.
And I would just add leadership behind all of that, great movements have great leaders, as, starting Giving Tuesday takes leadership, and even within big organizations that there's full of leaders, and, we're surrounded with them right here. This is Monday, as I alluded to, and I just want to say thank you for taking the time to come out and hear us and listen and engage with us ourselves tonight. Know that leadership in your own circles and organizations comes from very different corners, and sometimes digitally, when you don't even know that they sit right next to you at Politico for so long, when you all of a sudden realize that on the digital space there's a whole new different person that is potentially right beside you, and that's something that I think our generation is starting to really own and come out more eagerly to. And I think that's a place that there's engagement opportunities to be had with the people that you think you already know or only know digitally, and time to take that out of your office and into the real world or onto YouTube to reach more users and friendly people out there. Thank you to our hosts, the Embassy of Italy, and for joining us this evening. If you could help me thank the panelists. Great. Andreas? Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.